David Beckham had always believed that no matter how far life carried him, the streets of East London would always remain etched in his memory like the first lines of a book you could never erase. It was here, on cracked sidewalks and under dim yellow street lamps, that he first learned to chase a ball until his lungs burned and his heart felt like it might explode. It was here that the dream of football was not something polished and glamorous like the stadiums of Madrid or Manchester, but something raw, dirty, and real, played with a half-flat ball that might burst at any moment, on pavements that scraped knees and elbows, with shoes whose soles barely hung on. He had left this place decades ago, traveling the world, becoming a name known in every corner of the globe, but on this quiet afternoon as he walked the same streets again, he felt as though time had folded back on itself, like nothing had changed. The day was gray in that unmistakable English way. Clouds hung low, heavy and restless, and a light drizzle had turned the asphalt slick. Beckham pulled the hood of his jacket tighter, not because he cared about being recognized, he had long grown accustomed to people staring, but because he wanted to blend into the old neighborhood, to be just another passerby. He hadn't come here for the nostalgia of fans or for press photographs. He had come here because something in his chest had whispered that he needed to return, to walk the blocks of his childhood, to listen again to the heartbeat of where it all began. As he turned a corner near the community center, he saw the old patch of ground they used to call a pitch. It wasn't much, a rectangle of dirt, scarred by years of use, framed by two makeshift goals that leaned precariously to the side. Grass grew in uneven tufts, puddles formed in shallow dips, and the fence that once enclosed it now sagged, rust streaking its sides. Beckham stopped, staring. He remembered every inch of this place. The way the ball would skid unpredictably after rain, the way kids from 3 streets over would argue over who got to play next, the way he and his friends had once stayed out so late that their mothers had to drag them home by their ears. The memories came rushing back, not in photographs but in sensations. Mud on his shins, the smell of sweat mixed with wet soil, the sound of laughter and shouting echoing under the dull East End sky. And then he saw him. At first, Beckham thought it was just another man passing by, someone weighed down by the ordinary grind of life. The figure moved slowly along the opposite side of the street, one leg dragging slightly, arms carrying a small stack of folded lottery tickets. His shoulders hunched forward, his jacket frayed at the cuffs, his shoes worn so thin that Beckham could almost see the outlines of his toes pressing against the leather. But there was something about the way the man paused near the old fence, looking through it like he was staring into another lifetime, that made Beckham's breath catch. The face came into view as the man turned, and Beckham's heart lurched. Beneath the lines etched by years of hardship, beneath the rough beard and the tired eyes, he saw a boy he had once known better than himself. It was Michael, the boy with the golden left foot. The one who, when they were 13, could bend a ball around a makeshift wall of trash cans with a precision that left them all gaping. The boy who had scored goal after goal on this very dirt pitch, who had carried himself with a confidence that made the rest of them believe he was destined for greatness. And yet here he was, limping, selling lottery tickets, living a life Beckham could scarcely reconcile with the talent he remembered. Beckham froze, the world narrowing around him. For a moment he didn't know what to do. How do you greet someone who was once the mirror of your childhood, someone who had disappeared so completely from the narrative of your life that you sometimes wondered if you had imagined him? But then instinct overrode hesitation. Beckham stepped forward, his voice breaking the silence of drizzle and distance. "Michael?" he called out, his tone both cautious and desperate. The man looked up, startled, as though the sound of his own name had become foreign after years of neglect. His eyes scanned Beckham's face, confusion flickering first, then shock and finally recognition. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, and then he let out a laugh, hoarse, incredulous, almost bitter. "David Beckham," Michael said slowly, as if the name itself were too heavy to speak. Of all the places, of all the days. The years melted in that instant. Beckham crossed the street, rain soaking into his jeans, and before either of them could think, they were embracing. It was not the kind of hug fans expected from celebrities, polished for the cameras. It was clumsy, desperate, raw. Two boys from the East End colliding again after a lifetime apart. Beckham felt Michael's shoulders trembling under his hands, and he wasn't sure if it was from cold or shock, or the weight of everything unsaid between them. For Beckham, the embrace unlocked a flood of memory. He was 13 again, sprinting down this same dirt patch with Michael beside him, laughing as they tried to chip the ball over each other's heads. He remembered how they used to share sandwiches because Michael's family sometimes didn't have enough to pack him lunch. He remembered the day Michael's shoe split open during practice, and they took turns wearing Beckham's spare pair, switching every 10 minutes so Michael wouldn't have to play barefoot. Those were the things that built a bond deeper than blood. The little sacrifices, the shared hunger, the dream that felt so impossibly large it could barely fit into their small working-class bodies. Pulling back, Beckham finally looked fully into Michael's eyes. They were older, dimmer, but the spark of the boy he had once known still lingered, flickering like an ember under ash. "What happened, mate?" Beckham whispered, though part of him already knew. He had heard fragments years ago, rumors of an injury, whispers that Michael had dropped out of the youth academy. But seeing him like this, flesh and blood, struggling to make ends meet, was a truth Beckham had never prepared for. Michael shrugged, a bitter smile twisting his lips. Life happened. One bad tackle, one torn knee, and suddenly the dream's gone. No money for surgery, no scouts waiting around for a cripple. My dad worked double shifts, my mum cleaned houses. What were we supposed to do? I sold the boots, left the academy, and that was that. He lifted the stack of lottery tickets in his hand. Now I sell hope to strangers. That's my game these days. Beckham's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to insist that Michael deserved better, that fate had cheated him. But he knew that would sound hollow. Instead, he reached out, gripping his friend's shoulder with quiet intensity. "You were the best of us, Mike. I mean that. Better than me. Better than any of us." Michael let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Tell that to the millions who wear your jersey. Tell that to the billboards with your face on them. Tell that to my knee when it locks up halfway through a shift carrying boxes." The drizzle turned heavier, drops pattering against the rusted fence beside them. Beckham felt the sting of Michael's words not as an accusation, but as a mirror of reality. Fame and fortune had lifted him high above the streets they once shared, but Michael had been left behind, swallowed by a system that didn't forgive weakness, especially not when poverty compounded the wound. They stood there for a long moment, two men bound by a past that refused to let go. Finally, Beckham broke the silence. "Come with me," he said softly. "Let's get out of this rain. Let me buy you something warm to eat. We've got years to catch up on." Michael hesitated, pride and weariness flickering in his eyes. But then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. Together, they began to walk down the narrow street, Beckham matching his stride to Michael's uneven gait. And as they moved away from the old pitch, Beckham glanced back one last time. The dirt, the sagging fence, the puddles, they were all still there, but so too was something else. A promise, perhaps. A reminder that no matter how far life had carried him, he owed something to this ground, and to the boy who had once been its brightest star. For the first time in years, Beckham felt the weight of memory press hard against his chest. He didn't know what lay ahead, or how much he could do to rewrite the story life had stolen from Michael. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This reunion was not an accident. It was the beginning of something he had long owed his friend, a chance, however small, to give back what had been lost. And with that thought, Beckham placed his arm lightly around Michael's shoulder, guiding him toward the glow of a nearby pub, their silhouettes swallowed by the drizzle and the fading light of East London. The pub they stepped into was nothing glamorous, nothing that would appear in glossy magazines or tourist brochures. It was the kind of place where the tables were scarred by decades of pint glasses, where the smell of ale and fried chips clung to the air, where the regulars barely looked up from their darts or newspapers when someone walked in. For Beckham, it was strangely comforting. This was the type of establishment that had dotted his childhood landscape, places where fathers and uncles would gather after long shifts, talking about football, work, and the endless grind of life. For Michael, though, walking into the pub felt heavier. He had avoided places like this for years, places where football chatter flowed endlessly, where TV screens showed highlights of matches that reminded him of everything he had lost. Beckham chose a booth in the corner, away from curious eyes, and waved for 2 plates of shepherd's pie and 2 pints. As they sat down, the silence between them stretched. Beckham, used to interviews and cameras, felt oddly nervous, like a boy again, wondering how to start a conversation with his friend who had lived a life so different from his own. Michael broke the silence first, his voice low, almost bitter. "So, the superstar buys me lunch," he said, eyes fixed on the table. "Never thought I'd see the day." Beckham forced a small smile. "I'm not here as a superstar, mate. I'm just here as David. The same kid you used to nutmeg on this side street until I begged for mercy." For a brief second, Michael chuckled. It was small, fleeting, but real. Then his face hardened again. That was a long time ago. A whole different lifetime. The plates arrived, steaming and fragrant, and for a while they ate in silence. Beckham watched Michael carefully. The way he held his fork with a slight tremor, the way his eyes darted toward the door like he half expected someone to tell him he didn't belong there. Beckham wanted to tell him he did belong, that he was part of this world just as much as anyone, but he knew words alone would not erase decades of scars. Finally, Michael sighed, pushing his plate aside though half the food remained. He stared into his pint as if it contained the story of his life. "Do you know what it feels like," he said slowly, "to have the thing you love most ripped away from you? To watch it play out in front of your eyes every weekend on TV, knowing it could have been you, should have been you, but isn't? Do you know what it's like to hate the very thing that once made you feel alive?" Beckham's chest tightened. He had known injuries, yes. He had sat on the bench with ankles wrapped in ice, knees throbbing. He had feared, once or twice, that his career might end prematurely. But he had always had doctors, physios, clubs willing to spend money on his recovery. He had never faced the cruel choice between surgery and paying the bills, between chasing a dream and helping his family survive. He shook his head gently. "No, Mike, I don't know, but I can imagine. And it kills me to think of what you went through alone." Michael let out a dry laugh. Alone is the right word. After the injury, the academy stopped calling. Coaches stopped visiting. Friends, well, they had their own lives, their own dreams. I was just the lad who couldn't keep up anymore. I tried odd jobs, stacking shelves, loading trucks, but everywhere I went, my knee reminded me I was broken. And every time I saw kids kicking a ball in the park, I turned away. I couldn't stand it. It felt like football had betrayed me. Beckham leaned forward, his voice firm. "Football didn't betray you. Life did. Circumstances did. You had the talent, Mike, more talent than any of us. That hasn't changed. It's still there even if you don't see it right now." Michael looked at him, eyes narrowing as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then he shook his head. "Talent doesn't matter when your knee locks up every time you run. Talent doesn't matter when you've got bills to pay and no one willing to hire a cripple. You don't know what it's like to be invisible, David. To walk down the street and have no one see you. Not the prodigy, not the star. Just another man who failed." Beckham didn't flinch. He let Michael's words wash over him, heavy and cutting. Because somewhere deep down he knew Michael was right about one thing. Beckham had never known that kind of invisibility. His life had been defined by spotlights, by chance, by cameras flashing even when he didn't want them. And here sat his friend, forgotten by everyone except him, carrying a burden that had never been his to bear. The rest of the meal passed in fragments of conversation, bits of memory, sharp edges of bitterness. They reminisced about the day they had scored 12 goals on the pitch against boys from the next block. They laughed briefly about stealing a ball from the school gym and pretending it was theirs. But every memory was shadowed by the unspoken truth. Beckham had kept climbing and Michael had fallen. When they left the pub, the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. Beckham offered Michael his umbrella, but Michael shook his head. "I'm used to the rain," he muttered. They walked in silence until they reached a bus stop. Michael turned, his expression weary. "Thanks for lunch, David. But don't pity me. I don't need your charity." Beckham shook his head firmly. "It's not charity. It's friendship. And I'm not done, Mike. Not by a long shot." That night, lying awake in his hotel room, Beckham couldn't stop thinking about Michael's words. He thought about all the boys they had grown up with, the ones who had vanished into the working-class grind, their dreams left behind on cracked pitches. He thought about how easily it could have been him. One bad tackle, one missed opportunity, and he might have been the one selling lottery tickets while Michael became a global icon. The line between success and failure was so thin, so fragile. And he knew deep in his bones that he couldn't just walk away. The next morning, Beckham made a call. He contacted one of the top sports medicine clinics in London, a place that had treated countless professional athletes. Money was no obstacle. He arranged an appointment for Michael that very afternoon. When he showed up at Michael's small flat, a damp, dimly lit space with peeling paint and the faint smell of mildew, Michael resisted at first. "I told you I don't need your help," he said, arms crossed defensively. Beckham looked him straight in the eye. "This isn't about charity. This is about giving you back what was stolen from you. Just one chance, Mike. That's all I'm asking. Come with me." Reluctantly, Michael agreed. At the clinic, they ran scans, examined his knee, tested his mobility. The verdict was bittersweet. His days of competing professionally were gone, yes. But the doctors assured him that with surgery, therapy, and proper care, he could regain full mobility, live without constant pain, even run again. More importantly, he could coach, train, and live actively without fear of further damage. When Michael heard the words, he broke. Tears streamed down his face, silent at first, then racking sobs he couldn't hold back. For years he had carried himself like a man already buried. And here, suddenly, someone was offering him a chance at resurrection. not to reclaim lost glory but to find a new purpose. Beckham sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You may never play at Old Trafford, Mike," Beckham said softly, "but you can still be part of the game. You can still give kids what you once gave me, the belief that anything is possible." Michael covered his face with his hands, nodding through tears. It was the first time in decades that he felt a spark of hope. When they left the clinic, Beckham noticed Michael walked a little straighter, as if the mere possibility of change had lightened the load on his back. For Beckham, it was a reminder of why he had come home, why fate had brought them together again. He knew the journey wasn't over, it was only beginning. But for the first time he could see a path ahead for Michael, a path that wasn't defined by bitterness or regret, but by healing and possibility. And as they parted ways that evening, Beckham made himself a silent promise. He would not let Michael slip back into the shadows. Not this time. Michael's surgery was scheduled for early spring, and though he was terrified of the pain, of failure, of hoping for something only to lose it again, he showed up. Beckham was there that morning, waiting outside the operating theater like a brother, pacing back and forth in sneakers and a hoodie while doctors worked on repairing the knee that had stolen Michael's youth. When the surgery ended, the surgeon emerged with a reassuring smile. "It went well," he told Beckham. "It will take months of therapy, but he's got a good chance at full function." For Michael, the months that followed were grueling. Physical therapy was a war of inches. Bending a knee another degree, forcing muscles to remember what they had long forgotten, enduring pain that sometimes made him want to quit. Yet each time despair threatened to drag him under, Beckham appeared, sometimes in person, sometimes on the phone. He reminded him of the boy who had once dribbled on cracked asphalt with a grin, the boy who had refused to stop until the streetlights flickered on. Slowly, stubbornly, Michael healed. By midsummer he could walk without a limp. By autumn he could jog. And the first time he struck a ball gently across a rehab gym floor, tears ran down his cheeks. But Beckham had been planning something more. He knew that Michael needed not just healing but purpose. He arranged for Michael to visit a community football center in Manchester, a project Beckham himself had helped fund, built in one of the poorer neighborhoods where kids had little else but football to keep them out of trouble. The center was modest, 2 artificial turf fields, some locker rooms, a handful of volunteers. But it was alive with the shouts and laughter of children, the pounding rhythm of balls striking nets, the raw hunger of kids chasing a dream. When Beckham first brought Michael there, he hesitated at the entrance, leaning heavily on the crutch he still carried for support. "I don't belong here," Michael muttered, eyes darting to the kids sprinting back and forth. Beckham's voice was firm. "Yes, you do. You belong here more than anyone. These kids need someone who understands what it's like to fight, to fall, and to stand up again. You don't need to be famous. You just need to be you." Reluctantly, Michael agreed to shadow a training session. He stood on the sidelines, silent at first, watching as a group of 12-year-olds played a sloppy but spirited scrimmage. Their touches were heavy, their passes wild, but their eyes burned with passion. Then, almost without realizing, Michael shouted out, "Spread wider. Don't bunch up." His voice cut across the pitch, and the boys startled, then obeyed. The game opened up instantly, smoother, freer. The head coach glanced at Beckham with raised eyebrows, impressed. Beckham only smiled knowingly. From that day, Michael began volunteering regularly. At first, he was awkward, self-conscious about his limp, uncertain how to command attention. But the kids didn't care about his scars. They cared about the way he showed them how to trap the ball with the inside of the foot, how to keep their heads up when passing, how to stay disciplined even when tired. They began calling him Coach Mike. Week after week, Michael grew into the role. He discovered a joy he hadn't felt in years, not in scoring goals himself, but in watching a skinny boy master a dribble, or a shy girl finally strike the ball cleanly. He was strict when needed, demanding respect and effort, but he was also kind, remembering too well the sting of being overlooked. When one boy arrived with torn shoes and no money for boots, Michael quietly taped them up and let him play, remembering the day he and Beckham had shared a single pair. For Beckham, watching from the sidelines, it was like witnessing a resurrection. The bitterness that had once darkened Michael's eyes was fading. In its place, there was pride, confidence, a light that came not from personal glory but from giving. One evening, as they locked up the center after training, Beckham turned to his friend. "You see it now, don't you?" he said. "Football never left you, Mike. It was waiting for you to come back, not as a player but as a teacher." Michael nodded slowly. "I thought my story ended years ago, but maybe this is the real story. Maybe this is what I was meant for all along." The weeks rolled into months. Michael became a fixture at the community center. Parents thanked him, children adored him, fellow coaches leaned on him. He organized drills, taught discipline, but also told stories about what it felt like to dream, about the heartbreak of injury, about resilience. The kids listened wide-eyed, hanging on every word, because here was a man who had lived what they feared most and come out the other side. One rainy afternoon, a boy named Jamal stayed behind after training, lingering by the goal. Michael walked over, curious. "Why aren't you heading home?" he asked. The boy looked down, kicking at the turf. "My dad says football is a waste of time. He wants me to quit. Says I'll never be good enough." Michael crouched slightly, ignoring the twinge in his knee. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Listen to me. Football isn't just about becoming famous. It's about learning discipline, about learning to fight, about finding joy. If you love it, don't let anyone take it away. You may not know it yet, but what you learn out here will carry you through everything in life." The boy's eyes filled with tears and he nodded. In that moment, Michael saw himself. The boy he had been, the boy who had once needed someone to believe in him. And he realized he had become that person for someone else. That night, Beckham received a text from Michael. "For the first time in years, I don't feel broken. Thank you." Beckham smiled at the message, his heart swelling. He had always known Michael had something special, something worth saving. And now the world was beginning to see it too. By the end of the year, the center organized a community showcase, inviting families, local leaders, and even journalists to see the progress of the kids. Michael, nervous but determined, led the warm-ups. He barked instructions, clapped encouragement, adjusted stances. The kids responded with energy and joy, their trust in him absolute. When the showcase ended, parents crowded around to thank him, some with tears in their eyes. "You've given our kids hope," one mother said. "You've given them something to dream about." That night, after everyone had left, Beckham and Michael sat alone on the pitch, floodlights casting long shadows across the turf. Michael stared at the field, silent for a long time. Then he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never thought I'd find this again. I thought my life was over. But out here, with these kids, I feel alive." Beckham looked at him, pride shining in his eyes. "You're not just alive, Mike. You're making others alive. That's bigger than any trophy, bigger than any headline. This," he gestured to the empty pitch, "this is legacy." Michael swallowed hard, unable to respond. The only sound was the faint hum of the floodlights and the distant echo of laughter from the last kids leaving the grounds. But in that silence, he knew Beckham was right. His life had been given back to him. Not the life he had once imagined, but a new one, richer and perhaps more meaningful. Winter in Manchester had a way of biting into the bones, the kind of cold that seeped through thick coats and left clouds of breath hanging in the air like smoke. Yet on a Saturday morning, despite the frost still clinging to the blades of artificial turf, the community football center buzzed with life. Parents huddled in scarves and hats, children bounced on their toes in oversized jerseys, and the faint smell of hot chocolate wafted from a makeshift concession stand. It was the day of the first annual community youth tournament, a dream Beckham had funded and Michael had made real. For weeks, Michael had thrown himself into preparations. He drew up brackets, organized volunteer referees, begged for donated uniforms, and spent countless nights making sure everything was ready. To him, this wasn't just a tournament. It was proof that the kids had something to fight for, proof that he could still build something meaningful from the wreckage of his own broken dream. Beckham had flown in from London the night before, slipping into the center quietly. He wanted the spotlight on the children and on Michael, not on himself. He stood near the back of the crowd that morning, hands in his pockets, watching as Michael strode across the pitch with a whistle hanging from his neck. The limp was still there, faint but visible, yet he carried himself with authority, his voice clear and commanding as he organized the teams. To see Michael like this, Beckham thought, was to see a man reborn. The tournament began with chaos. Balls flying wildly, kids shouting, parents cheering. Michael paced the sideline, barking instructions, clapping encouragement, crouching down to adjust shin guards and untangle shoelaces. Beckham watched, a smile tugging at his lips. This was Michael's element now, not the roar of stadiums but the messy, joyful noise of children who believed football could change their lives. As the games progressed, something remarkable happened. The kids didn't just play, they played with discipline, with teamwork, with flashes of brilliance that could only have come from Michael's guidance. Little Jamal, once shy and uncertain, darted down the wing with confidence. Emily, a girl whose parents had doubted her, slammed home a goal that sent the crowd roaring. Each time, Michael's face lit up with pride. By late afternoon, the final match came down to two teams. the Red Lions and the Blue Hawks. The score was tied 1-1, the kids exhausted but unwilling to quit. Beckham found himself edging closer to the sideline, caught up in the drama as if it were a Champions League final. With only a minute left, Jamal broke free on the left side. Michael shouted encouragement, waving his arms. Jamal sprinted down the wing, the ball glued to his feet. A defender lunged, but Jamal sidestepped, eyes wide with determination. He cut inside, swung his foot and sent the ball curling toward the goal. Time seemed to slow. The keeper dove, fingertips outstretched, but the ball soared past and thudded into the net. The pitch erupted. Kids screamed, parents jumped to their feet, and Jamal, overwhelmed, didn't run toward his teammates. He ran straight to Michael. Throwing his arms around him, tears streaming, he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Goal for Coach Mike." Michael froze, the boy's words piercing deeper than any cheer he'd ever heard. Then the dam broke. Tears spilled down his face, raw and unstoppable. He hugged Jamal tightly, his body shaking as the crowd's roar thundered around them. Beckham, standing a few yards away, felt his own throat tighten. In all his years, lifting trophies, scoring in iconic stadiums, he had never seen a moment so pure, so profoundly human. When the final whistle blew, the Red Lions were champions, but the real victory belonged to Michael. Parents swarmed him, thanking him, praising him. Kids clung to his arms, chanting his name. For a man who had once believed he was forgotten, invisible, it was redemption. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the empty pitch, Beckham and Michael sat side by side on the wooden bleachers. The air was quiet now, the chaos of the day replaced by a serene stillness. Michael's eyes were still red from crying, but there was a softness to his face, a peace Beckham had never seen before. "You know," Michael said quietly, "I used to think my life ended the day I got injured. I thought everything after that was just survival. But today when that boy hugged me, I realized something. Maybe I was never meant to be the star on the field. Maybe I was meant to be here to help them become the stars." Beckham turned to him, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Mike, you've done something I never could. I inspired millions from stadiums, sure. But you've inspired them right here, face to face. That's worth more than any trophy." Michael smiled faintly. "You're wrong about one thing. You gave me this chance. Without you, I'd still be on the street corner selling lottery tickets. You didn't just save me, David. You gave me back myself." Beckham swallowed hard. He looked out at the pitch, the fading light painting the goals in silhouette. "You know, people always ask me about my greatest goal. They expect me to talk about free kicks at Old Trafford or that strike in Madrid. But they're wrong. The greatest goal of my life isn't one I scored on the pitch. It's this, seeing you stand tall again. That's the most beautiful goal I'll ever be part of." Silence fell between them, but it was not the silence of absence. It was the silence of understanding, of two men whose lives had diverged but found their way back to each other. In that stillness, under the dimming sky, Beckham felt something greater than fame, greater than football. He felt the permanence of friendship, the power of redemption, the beauty of giving back. As they rose to leave, Michael paused at the edge of the pitch, gazing out at the field where the kids had played. The echoes of their laughter seemed to linger in the cold air. He took a deep breath, shoulders squared, and for the first time in decades he felt whole. Beckham watched him, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He knew that tomorrow the world would continue spinning, games would be played, headlines would be written. But tonight, here in this modest community pitch, something eternal had been scored, a goal not for glory, not for fame, but for life itself. They walked away together, two boys from East London who had once shared a dream. One had lived it, the other had lost it, but in the end they had both found something greater. And as the lights of the city flickered in the distance, Beckham knew that this was the ending he had always wanted. Not an ending really, but a new beginning for both of them.